We are going to have a little subcommittee meeting here on potential topics for the JLARC in the coming year. And our subcommittee chair is going to be Marcus Simon. So I'm going to hand this gavel down to Marcus so he can, if anyone gets raucous, he can just bang him into submission.
Gavel everybody down into submission?
Yes.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Do we have a couple people online? Okay. All right. Well, when they get here, we'll go ahead and throw them up on the screen, or somebody will let us know that they're here. I think Senator McDougall is a member of the subcommittee, and Delegate Wilt, and they plan to join us online. So for those of you that don't remember, this is our second meeting of the Studies Subcommittee. We had a fully virtual meeting about a month ago, and we gave the staff some direction. We sort of more of a brainstorming session, frankly, than anything else. And we kind of, I think, narrowed that down to about 8 or 9 sort of main ideas for potential topics. And I think that the charge to the staff at that time was to come back and sort of flesh those out into something that we could then take a look at. And we'll see how you guys are done with that. We may or may not make any decisions today about recommending something to the full JLARC to adopt as far as the studies go, but we'll sort of see how you guys did at turning our brainstorming into something that's actually actionable. We may winnow the list down a little further too. I think we gave you a bunch of things to look at, and we may even add a thing or two. So we'll see how it went. So with that, happy to turn it over to the staff if you want to introduce yourself and go ahead and launch into the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We can hear you, but.
Good morning. My name is Justin Brown, and I'm one of the associate directors at JLARC. And as you said, the purpose this morning is to start to continue, I think, the process of selecting potential JLARC studies in the future. And I'll wait a second for the slides to pop up here. Or can you see them on your?
We have them up on our screen, and yeah, there they are.
Great. So just continue the conversation, and where this is all going is try to finalize the study topics for next year. And one thing that we'll see how it goes this morning, but the task would be for us to have a dialogue today and then us to disappear and maybe come back as soon as the November full JLARC meeting. And what we would do is draft study resolutions that you all could look at and give us some feedback on, and that would kind of complete the process. So in terms of what we need to accomplish today, just as a reminder, we can normally do 5 studies. And so we have one that's already been directed through joint resolution. And so that's already on our plate, and that's one related to gun violence, and that was approved by both the House and the Senate in 2024. So because we can normally do 5, we have 4 left. But one thing I want you to just keep in mind that I think if the studies are narrower, sometimes we can do more than 5. I also think that historically there's been this concept of a pipeline where you can just kind of keep topics that you're interested in floating out there maybe at a lower priority. And as there's staff capacity, we can get to those. And one thing we always like to emphasize is that if during the legislative session something comes up that's a bigger priority, you can certainly ask us to set aside one of the studies you've told us to do as a commission and pass something new through a joint resolution, and that would supersede what you've given us on the commission side. So you have some flexibility here, I think, which is good. So here is the list, and this is a combination of things that have been referred over by House rules, some ideas that you as study subcommittee members had. And we had a chat just a few moments ago and kind of the continuing discussion about K-12, and I've put something there at the bottom that's about the accreditation process for K-12 schools. So I'll just go through each of these, and we have a couple of slides. We can have dialogue as you go, or we can just wait to get to the end, however you want to do that.
I think probably we'll jump in. This seems like a lively group, but we'll see.
Good. We like it when you engage on that. So the first one was referred from House rules this past session, and it's about the scope and cost of felony drug possession laws. And right now, current policy is that possession of Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 drugs is a felony in the Commonwealth. It's not a felony in all states, and it looks like there's some states that allow diversion or, I guess, reclassification. If you're found possessing drugs, you reclassify it down to a misdemeanor. And you can see the rationale there. Other states use this for not classifying drug possession as a felony. And I think the concept would be that it relieves the strain on the criminal justice system. So in terms of things that if we were to draft a resolution for this, and again, we have a starting point because there was already one introduced through rules, these are the specific things that I think we could tease out as specific study issues. We'd put them as items in a resolution. Looking at the impact on adults and juveniles if they are convicted, calculating the costs and the potential savings, and obviously taking a look at how other states go about this. So that would be one potential topic. I'll just pause for a second if there's any sense one way or the other about this as a potential study area.
Mr. Chairman.
Justin, did you mention the last time we looked at something like this or something that's similar to this in our criminal justice work?
We, on the criminal side, I think it's been maybe never. Yeah, it's been a long, it's probably never. And this one specifically, we haven't done anything like this in a while. But I think we've looked, we've done some criminal justice work lately. I think members have found it to be useful. It's obviously an important topic. So it's something we could absolutely do.
One other question, I guess, is this something that the crime, I mean, this one seems kind of like a crime commission-ish topic. I think one of the things we talked about last time was, are there other, committees and commissions and things that have looked at this? Do we know if anybody else has looked at this issue besides us? I see somebody shaking their head no.
Yeah, and I'll just, I do think that there's some research in here that's maybe a little bit more than just kind of the statutory approach. I think there's quite a bit of data, and I think we maybe have the capacity to do that pretty well.
Okay, thanks. We can, I guess we can have a few questions as we go, and I think probably does make some sense to sort of see all the slides if we're going to start then to winnow. So go ahead, keep going.
That's good. So the next topic was an interesting one. I believe it was Senator McPike that brought this one up. This is another area that we really haven't done any direct work in. So there's interest in reviewing ABC. Obviously, that's been in the media. It's an agency that has an important regulatory role. It generates a lot of revenue for the state. I think it was about $600 million in recent years. ABC is an independent agency, as you probably know, and we found that sometimes when we look into an independent agency, it's a pretty useful review because in contrast with agencies that have to come to the legislature and go through the budget process, there's not quite as much scrutiny. I think there's a reason for that. But sometimes when we look at independent agencies, we find things that need attention because they don't get as much scrutiny. You can see on the slide there has been declining revenue. Some of that may be related to coming off of the pandemic, but I think it's hard to tell. I think the last data point they have is about $1.4 billion in revenue for ABC. And they have been trying to kind of right-size themselves to match their revenue levels. They've laid off some staff, and they're trying to do some things on reducing their operating costs. I think there's also been some, concerns or at least potential issues with inventory control. It's obviously a big, vast network with wholesalers and retailers, and so that would be, I think, something of interest as well. So we could do this the way we would do our standard agency reviews. So we'd look at kind of the back office things, but we would also look at the specific functions that they undertake. We could look at how they go about forecasting revenues. That's something we do when we look at an agency that tries to be prospective with anything, whether it's enrollment or revenue. We would also take a look at their IT systems, really anything that merits attention. So we could draft a resolution on this one too, but I'll pause here.
Mr. Chair.
Senator McPike.
Yeah, I understand there's a number of different moving parts, and there are some changes that are happening at ABC. It might be useful to delay in a review until some intermediary fixes are done and there's data collected. It's hard to collect data and do analysis of something where there's a lot of moving parts and changes that are happening. And I think the most positive thing is I know that there are some changes that are happening. Mm-hmm. I'd prefer potentially, Mr. Chair, to see this play out over the next year or two and then maybe come back to it later on. I think it needs a little bit more time, before we jump into it.
And this is something that we could keep on a list somewhere if there's interest next year in bringing it back up. But
yeah, like I said, maybe a pipeline thing. I think it's useful that you guys have done sort of what the study would look like. But since this was Senator McPike's idea and he thinks it needs some more time to marinate, that might make our job of winnowing things easier today. So thank you, Senator McPike.
Makes sense. So another idea coming out of the meeting last month was looking at the capital asset management program or system. And obviously this is a large, high dollar part of state government. And it's our understanding that DGS has a system to track the condition of facilities. And I believe it uses that to at least help allocate maintenance funding. And depending on the type of project, there's different processes used to plan and build the facilities. Obviously, higher education is its own whole big thing. And then you have things like corrections and the other functions of government where there's a big physical footprint. And I think there's been some concern or frustration kind of in the differences in how long it can take from getting capital funding to the design process to when you actually see construction and when something's actually finished. I think sometimes there's some frustration that funds have been allocated and maybe progress isn't happening quite as quickly as people think it could or should. In terms of the specific things that let's see, is this not working? There we go. So we could take a look at just kind of the availability of the data about all the different types of assets, the process to plan for maintaining those assets, look at determining what the new project list should be, and then, as I mentioned, the ability of agencies to actually kind of do this, whether it's on their own or with DGS's help. So I'll pause on that one.
Delegate Sickles.
One aspect of this, is it not, is a question. The way we fund capital, if we don't fund it largely up front, if we do it over time, that's a recipe for dragging out. We're building a new hospital in Petersburg now that is going to take forever to build it. We need it built, tomorrow, and it's like 5 years out from today. So I don't know if we have any responsibility for that. Here, that's the question, because we didn't fund it all up front and they have to wait on us. But that's a question that I hope we would answer if we follow up on this study, Mr. Chairman.
So Mr. Chairman, if I might just to clarify, so part of the concept there would be what are the different revenue streams that could be used in addition to kind of the state borrowing? And is there a way to maybe do that a little bit faster to get buildings built more quickly? Is that kind of the concept there? Or?
Well, no, I think that we can't resist sometimes all the requests for capital, and so we fund too much, so nothing gets built efficiently.
I see.
That's a theory. And I think out there we've got some really bad examples of things taking way too long to get built once we've allocated the money.
Understood. So it's also this notion of there's an opportunity cost if you're not prioritizing. Absolutely. Maybe something is happening over here when it would be better to happen over here. This is a more urgent need, so that process to prioritize across. One thing I'll just mention by way of interest or whatever, we in the higher ed series we did about 10 years ago, we had a lot of recommendations for how to make the process just for higher education capital kind of more quantitative and objective so that there would be some prioritization. And there was a little bit of follow through on that, but basically that process hasn't gotten where it needs to get. And that may be kind of emblematic of what you're talking about in terms of are we making the tough decisions in terms of what's the real priorities as a Commonwealth?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, if I'm not to put words in your mouth, I think part of that quantitative and objectivity is part of it, but I think there is a question of when we say yes to too many things at once, does that hurt all of the projects? Would we be better off to bring more focus into our capital program, right? So that let's finish these three buildings. I'm just using picking numbers, but let's finish these three buildings before we start talking about these three buildings instead of trying to build 6 buildings at once. All of them take longer, nothing gets accomplished. So is there some value in, I think the gut instinct is maybe yes, that would make things get done faster, but do you guys have some way to study that and tell us for sure that is hurting our ability to get projects done or not, or it doesn't really matter? You know what I mean? You guys could do 100 at a time, it'll all be really slow. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to find out. Am I right, Mr. Delegate Sickles?
Yes, that's exactly. And also, it occurred to me that if you had a capital plan that we depend on, we try to do this on the 12th floor. If you have a capital plan that people can depend on, this is going to come. If up in my local jurisdiction, they have the schools have a capital plan and they follow it to the T. and I was really skeptical because when I ever tell a constituent the government's going to do something by some date, I always put a caveat on there. But I have noticed over years that they hit their targets. You know, when we're going to replace that school in 2009, and they did it. You know, and they just have I don't know if our plan. I don't know if we could be that good, but are we? How are we doing? That's the question.
Understood.
Following a plan. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess one of the components, and it leads into our discussion later on today at the 10 o'clock meeting in terms of SHEV and higher education funding and infrastructure. There's noted reports in that upcoming report about facility asset replacement cycles and the rest of it. And one of the issues that I was trying to highlight and illustrate with this is we do not necessarily have a good benchmark in terms of the facility condition assessment and its index compared to all other assets, whether it's a higher ed portfolio or others. This second component to that leads to how those assets are being programmed. And I don't know that as a General Assembly we have a very good picture from a data perspective in terms of where the life cycle of the asset is at. The second tier of that is how its programming and needs or demands or other reprogramming of that asset could occur. And that sort of fits in with, do we build a new building or do we reprioritize that asset? How is it currently functioning? It's sort of the overlay of both the asset's condition life, its needed maintenance, repair, and then how it's being utilized. And I think there's probably ways to make sure we're understanding as we deal with approving projects, how we understand the apples to apples sort of comparison in terms of priorities and where it fits in with the strategic facilities master plan effort overall. To Mr. Chairman's example of sort of, you know, a school project and master planning it out, we need to see the cadence over time of where we're going as a Commonwealth. We know that takes years to do, but I think often we don't have necessarily a data set that tells us where the asset and priority should be based on the needs, the condition of the asset, and the rest of it.
Understood. Okay, we can work that in if y'all ask us to draft something on
So you guys have a couple more bullets you could add, or do you think some of those things we talked about maybe fit within some of these bullets that you've already got?
What we can do is, if this is a topic that y'all want us to move out on, we'll between now and the November meeting, we'll draft a specific resolution, and we can make sure that this shows up in addition to these. They capture exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
So I'd be happy to do that.
I see a lot of people right behind you furiously taking notes. I'm confident you're getting it. Oh, yeah, is that Senator McDougall?
Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other thing is we're looking at life cycle, and I think Senator McPike made some really good points, particularly in relation to higher education and even our state resources. As we have changing school populations and changing needs from the state, are we actually using the space in the way that we need to be using? And in 10 years, will there be the individuals at the institutions, whether they're universities or state government, there to use the space as well? I think those changes are coming, and how our expenditures over a 50-year horizon meet those needs that are changing pretty rapidly in the future is important as well.
Understood. So this notion on trying to understand how, certainly by the time you finish the building, but even thereafter, are you delivering something that's needed in the context of that particular function? Makes sense.
All right, very good. We ready to move on to the next topic? I think so. Go ahead.
So another topic idea, I believe, came from Senator Eben, and it was a review of the medical marijuana program. As you probably know, this used to be a function of the Board of Medicine, but when you set up the commercial marijuana market, which was not reenacted, you also set up this cannabis control authority, and that authority now oversees this medical program. There's licensed suppliers in each region of the state, and that supplier can have up to 5 dispensaries in their region. It's been, I guess, uneven progress across all the regions. There was a bit of a hold up with one region, but I think there is some progress being made there. I touched base with the CCA, and they just completed they hired a kind of an expert to do a third-party review of the market in terms of the adequacy of supply and demand. I've not looked at it yet, but they paid for that. They also are right now trying to finalize something looking at patient access and costs. I think that's going to come out soon. So on those two topics, I think either has been some work or there's some underway. But in terms of the specific ideas that we could examine on a medical marijuana program, we could take a look at the adequacy of suppliers and dispensaries. There's this notion of vertical integration and kind of whether that's creating some whether it's helping or hurting in terms of patient cost and access. The other thing we could do is, given that the CCA was kind of set up for something a little bit bigger and different, would it make sense to maybe look at kind of that structure and maybe the funding levels, given that we don't have a commercial market, we just have a medical program. So those are some ideas. I'll pause here if there's questions or comments on that one.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Abbott.
if I could ask Mr. Brown, did you say that the study from the CCA or that they contracted for, has that been released yet?
I believe that has been released, and the market review one has been released. And I can try to find it this afternoon and get it to you. And they are in the process of finalizing a review on access and cost that I think is kind of a companion piece to that. So I can get if you're interested, I can get the latest status on those and give them to you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, I would say that I didn't realize the CCA was undergoing their own study. Maybe we should have JLARC just review it and see if that was adequate or if there is more that can be done to verify their results or expand on them. Because if they've already done a study that's adequate, maybe we don't need to
Right, or maybe it affects the scope, like you said, of what we study. Mm-hmm. So let's sort of wait and see what they come up with before we add this one to the program, is what I'm hearing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Another idea was correctional education programs. Let's see, and this was a topic that's been on a variety of lists over the years. And this is obviously how corrections goes about providing these programs. And these are really programs intended to give inmates kind of the skill sets that they need to help them when they're released to be productive and employable. So we could dig into each of those programs. I think there was some discussion at the last meeting that there's maybe quite a bit of variation across all the different facilities in terms of the resource levels and how that's done. And so, you know, that could be an issue kind of under the broader idea of just the adequacy of the funding and the program itself, and whether these programs actually are effective, whether they kind of do what they're intended to do. I think that's something we could take a look at as well if you were interested in this topic.
Senator Locke.
I think that given the recent emphasis on reentry from the executive side of things, this is very important, particularly because the question I ask is, at what point do we decide to actually start the process of educational and vocational training for reentry? You know, is it a month before a person is to be released, or is it day one upon being incarcerated? You know, my response would be day one of being incarcerated. So I would like for this kind of study to look at that process. Understood. You know, okay. Of how is this being done, you know, and what are the programs and how are those programs being implemented? Understood.
So that we would work in this notion of kind of how early inmates are kind of identified for that. And I would assume there's a type of kind of screening process in terms of who has some skills already that they can improve versus who doesn't. And so really that kind of front end part and how being proactive about it rather than waiting too late. We can draft that up, absolutely. Yeah.
And I would say too, you guys use the term corrections. So I don't know if we could look beyond just the Department of Corrections. I think a lot of people spend a lot of their incarcerated time in local jails, right? So talking to Senator Locke's point about day one, and then often, you know, there's time served or they get credit for the time they've spent in the jail and so forth. And so, again, I don't know if it's within y'all's scope or ability or not to look at those issues too, but, and then how they integrate, like what kind of pre-release things, I think we call them pre-release, but there are things that happen in the jails. How well does that integrate with the DOC? People that start a program at the Fairfax County Adult Detention Center, for instance, later they're sentenced to the Department of Corrections. Are they able to, is there any continuity or opportunities for continuity there? So,
understood. I think we could absolutely, because to your point, that there's Some people do spend more time in jail than some might think while they're various kind of being adjudicated and everything. So I think that's something we could work. And it would expand it quite a bit, but I think that's important. So we could do that.
Mr. Chairman.
To follow up on your point, I was thinking very similar, along similar lines. The administration now has an initiative to reduce recidivism, and unfortunately, to make the recidivism issue look worse, he combined a local jail recidivism rate with our pretty low, as far as I know, state correctional institution recidivism rate. And obviously, those are two very different populations. You rarely commit a crime when you're 65 years old, or 60 years old when you get out. But anyway, so I'm really interested in what the local and regional jails can do immediately, like the senator said, how we can work on the jail population issue, the frequent flyers that are in there. What can we do? And right now, as far as I know, there's very little for that population. Anyway, it's just my 2 cents. Mr. Chairman.
And one thing, I mean, y'all know this better than I do, but whenever we do this type of work, you very quickly run into kind of just barriers. So obviously kind of the substance abuse and mental health challenges that are kind of the jails in particular are dealing with. So I think in terms of barriers to some of this, that topic I'm guessing will come up. But we can absolutely draft something up for you to look at.
All right, and I guess there's a question of, well, you do things sequentially. Like first, we clean them up off and solve their mental health and other issues before we start the vocational, or can you do, walk and chew gum at the same time? Is there a reason to do that? All right, I think this one sounds like a winner, so with maybe a little bit more fleshing out. Let's go on to the next one.
So the next one, this was something that kind of came to us. We're doing a management review right now of the health department, so we're getting familiar kind of with the program side of the health department. So this would be to look at the inspection and regulatory programs that the health department does. And that first bullet there just lists some of the big ones, and they're fairly consequential. Obviously, there's a variety of healthcare components, food safety, particularly with restaurants. They work with DEQ on the drinking water quality. And one thing that we're kind of learning on our management review is that there's some inspections, I think particularly on the healthcare side, that are way past due. And some of that's, I think, maybe a staffing issue with the department, but there may be some broader issues there. So this is kind of an offshoot of the one we'll be presenting to you on the management of the health department in November, but this would focus just on inspection programs themselves. So these are just the types of things that we do whenever we look at a regulatory or inspection program, timeliness, effectiveness, kind of the criteria for giving a permit or giving a license. The enforcement side, I think, could be important for an effective regulatory regime. And obviously we look at how other states go about this too, because everybody tries to regulate these different functions in various ways. So I'll pause on that for a moment.
Any questions about that one? All right, I think we can keep going.
So we also talked last time about something that we'll talk about at the 10 o'clock meeting, but the landscape around higher education has shifted and is in the process of shifting. And so we focus just on the four-year institutions with what we're going to talk about later this morning. The idea here would be to maybe do the same thing for the two-year institutions. And as you all know, the state does a variety of things to try to make it easier to enroll and complete at a two-year or transfer from a two-year. There's also some things that are done to incentivize that. And you're really starting to see in the wage data for the first time in decades that the ability to earn more money is starting to go up if you don't have a four-year degree, but you have a certification or a credential. So what's a little puzzling here is at the bottom, it may be a little hard for you to see, but if you look at the last 10 years in terms of, this is for Virginia high school graduates, the percentage of where they're going has actually trended down in terms of going into the two-year institutions. And so that's a little puzzling. The next slide, I've got a little bit more recent data without the big scale so you can kind of see it. And it bounces around when you look at VCCS. So it's, it obviously dropped during the pandemic, and it's kind of started to tick back up. But so I think part of the question is, what's the right level? And I think in terms of those things, that last group of bullets, we could look at kind of whether these institutions individually and collectively are kind of fulfilling the role that is needed in the economy and that it's needed in kind of the modern era for students. And I think there may be a big opportunity in terms of coordination, across 2 years, between 2 years in a region and employers. I know this is something we always talk about, but I think it's something to keep pushing on. Formal partnerships, informal partnerships, things like that. So we could draw this out more if you're interested in it, but those are some ideas.
All right, members. Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And should we end up heading in this direction, one important piece where there's a lack of continuity is how the various community college regions integrate with the local high schools. Really, the enrollment, part of the enrollment potential increase or boon could be trying to streamline as much as possible a high school student being able to graduate with an associate's degree, as it's modeled in some other states. And so in addition to how it integrates well, which I think we've made some strides, integrates well with into the workforce development initiatives, looking back the other way and trying to ensure how do we streamline, given some work we did with House Bill 1087 this year and a couple of other initiatives, that would be important, especially with regards to lowering student debt in the Commonwealth, if we were able to do that.
Understood.
Yeah, I'll just say on a personal note, I've just dropped off a 18-year-old at Virginia Tech, and because in large part due to his dual enrollment opportunities as well as AP credits and things like that, he could, if he wanted to, graduate in 3 years. So I mean, there's real savings to Virginia families and students, and opportunity to reduce student debt, even if you don't get all the way to an associate's degree. If you can do a lot of that dual enrollment piece, even if it doesn't result in an associate's degree, there's an opportunity for savings at the back end with smooth integration. So I think we could all stand to benefit from that.
And so we can, if there's interest, we can draft a resolution up. One thing I'll just remind everybody, we did a pretty detailed review of the dual enrollment stuff a couple years ago. And so we could update that. But one kind of tricky thing about this, I think on the policy side, y'all have done a lot, but on the implementation side, it's hard because, for example, getting enough teachers who kind of will do those dual enrollment classes, that's bumping up against the broader kind of teacher K-12 pipeline problem. So we'll try to suss that out, but there is just a fundamental barrier on that I think it's just going to take time to solve, and that's affecting all K-12 in addition to this dual enrollment thing. But
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I got another question. And over the years, I've heard some complaints from the business community that we're not, at our community college, not producing what they need right now. So I don't know how the community college system, I should call them and ask us, see Ellen sitting out there, but how they make sure that they're trying. I know they're trying to.
I think they definitely have initiatives, and I think they try pretty hard. But.
So is there a standard evaluation for that, though? Do we have a way to look at that across? Are these 23 community colleges serving the needs of their existing business community?
We could add that in, absolutely. And there definitely is a process and attempt to do that, but I think in terms of how it works and what would be the framework to evaluate it, that's something we could add in here as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Delegate Rasool.
Yeah, just to add to that really quickly, because I know Tracy worked hard on some of this dual enrollment work before, and the dynamics that have evolved now is post-COVID. We have a few different buckets. We have people who are dual enrolled at the high school. Then you have that are taught by high school teachers. You have dual enrolled that are taught by college professors. And then you have, currently it's called dual enrolled, but it really should be called concurrently enrolled. The high school student who takes the online or in-person community college at the community college. And there is no streamlined process for that in Virginia. And so it is all over the place. I just met with them last week. And so just building upon some of your work, trying to figure out what would be the plan and moving forward would help a lot of families with some student debt.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Understood. And, just doing a lot of K-12 work, it's the variation kind of across high schools in terms of the ability to help kind of build those relationships and make that navigable for the students. I'm sure there's a lot of variation in that. So, okay.
All right. Thank you. Let's go on to the next one because we got another meeting coming up. So let's keep going.
There was an idea, I believe it was actually yours, Mr. Chairman.
A great idea, actually.
Well, it was an interesting idea. I think to kind of, there's been a lot of discussion about kind of what's happening with the population and can we get some information here. So, then this has come up in a variety of ways, but obviously you've kind of seen either like population stagnation or out-migration from Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. In terms of the population and the business growth in rural areas, that's something that can be, obviously essential to a local economy. And then we've talked about a decline in the school-age population, and we're seeing an increase in the retiree population. So one idea would be to look into all these trends and just kind of examine what is actually happening, what might happen, and what impact is that having on the economic growth prospects of the state, the demand for state and local government services. I think this also might have the side benefit of, I bet there's a couple of additional JLARC studies lurking in this that we could do deep dives on because it's such a big topic. This is probably something we'd work with a demographer on. So I think the way we do this, it wouldn't necessarily count as one of the four. But I think it'd be an interesting thing to put on the table.
So this is more of like a pipeline development kind of a category, or?
It could be, but I think it's something, if you're interested in it, we could move out on it and start planning it out and go ahead and start doing it, because I think there's a lot of data there. But what I was talking about in terms of, we would do that first, and then maybe it would tee up some things over the next couple of years that might be offshoots of, let's say that, a particular function of government doesn't look like it's really in a good posture to deal with the changes in the population, for example. And that could
You guys, the asterisk, I guess, indicates you guys can manage that with sort of existing resources without having it have to count as one of the four that to hit your limit.
I think it wouldn't count as the four. I think we would find a way to work with some outside experts on this, and it wouldn't count.
All right, well, that sounds like an easy one then. Let's go on to the next one. Are there any questions about that? I'm sorry. Let me go back. I apologize. Senator Locke and then Senator McPike. Wasn't looking the way.
Yeah, I was at a recent meeting of the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, and the Hampton Roads Business Roundtable said they'd done some work on this, and they kind of know who and they know why.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that's a group that you may want to start a conversation with the out-migration piece.
Good.
Because they've started the work.
That's great. Okay.
Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess to follow up that, we've had different reports over the last couple of years that are hinting and indicating, for instance, affordable housing. We know that we're behind several 100,000 units. One of the things that comes up pretty consistently is how localities adopt comp plans and whether or not they're incorporating the regional needs versus their own needs. And I think there's an interrelationship between how we're looking at housing affordability, transportation infrastructure, probably what Hampton Roads is looking at. There are many interconnected issues, whereas localities plan and act solely in isolation and not as a part of a holistic group in meeting the Commonwealth needs. There becomes a backlog and deficiencies of what the collective is experiencing. And certainly the out-migration we've seen the last couple of years centers around a lot of those quality of life issues. And so I think there's a nature that gets back to land use and local government coordination from regional planning perspective that we're not quite connecting the dots on, would be my suggestion to dig in a little bit, maybe for next time.
Got it. Thank you. Senator Delegate Rasool.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, and just adding to Senator McPike's, I don't know if we have our arms around the impact of large institutional investors on single and multifamily dwellings in the Commonwealth. And we feel as though that what I'm seeing more and more of great data that is inferring that is not artificially inflating the market, but it certainly has a profound impact on the market to making housing more affordable. So we're talking about the very large portfolios that are out there. So just to be keeping in mind, if we do go down that route, to be thinking through that as we move forward.
Yeah, I think the issue of if we determine that housing cost is sort of one of the drivers of demographic shift, that might turn into one of those identified topics for JLARC that you can take an even deeper dive on that specific area. What's driving, the cost? Is it regulation? Is it institutional investors? Is it, planning and so forth? Or what combination of the three, and what levers are available that we can pull on to try to relieve that pressure?
Absolutely. Yeah, we did a pretty deep dive on affordable housing, I guess maybe couple of years ago. But clearly, in the areas where there is out-migration, that's what you hear. That's a big reason why people are leaving. It's too expensive to get a house. So,
All right.
okay. So it sounds like this. There's a lot to tackle on this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the next steps here. We just need you to pick at least 4. But I also want to go back to the. I'm sorry.
Did we want to talk about the educational?
Well, I was going to go back to the overall list. Is the only thing I have in here on education. So why don't we have that up while we talk about it? And yes, there was some interest in us looking into the changes that have been recently made to the K-12 accreditation process. And I think what's interesting here is I don't think we've ever looked at that, but it's a very consequential thing. It's part of the broad standards of quality. And as most of you know, we just did a kind of big project on the funding formula side. And so it's reasonable to kind of then pivot over to what is the accountability system for schools in terms of what are they doing with this funding and what are the standards. So it's my understanding some of you have heard from school divisions that maybe there's some concern about the changes that were made. So if you're interested, we could draft a resolution on how the process works, how it has changed, the implications of it, how other states go about it. I think there would be a lot to look at here. I don't think there's any easy solutions, but it's critically important. So I don't know if others have comments on that, but.
So you think, okay, go ahead. Who wants to go first?
Absolutely, definitely, because it's unclear as to what the criteria are for the accountability standards or accrediting standards, how are we determining which school districts or which school divisions are, being determined as, accredited or not? What are the determinations? It's not clear, and we need some clarity.
All right. Delegate Rasul.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, and when we get into the new accountability system, having 60% of our schools and more than, I think, 65% of our elementary schools being off track or worse based on this new accountability system has gotten the ire of a lot of folks. So just because it is a big ticket item, agreeing with Senator Locke, it's something that we need to take a look at.
All right. So I think we're about to get to next steps, but while we have this list up here, if I might short circuit things a little bit, I think we heard that for item 2 on the list and for item 4 on the list, we're going to sort of take those off for now. And there just seemed to be a consensus about that. I heard a lot of enthusiasm for number 5. And so I think we need to sort of pick, 3 more? And then for number 9, we just heard a lot. So I think number 5 and 9, so that means there's 2 more on, and then 8 sort of comes off the list, demographic trends, because that's an ongoing. So it's sort of like, are we down to choosing between, so we need 2 more, right? I
think that's right.
Following? And so of those 2, we've got felony drug possession, the state capital asset management, BDH inspection programs, and the 2-year education institutions, right? So of those 4, which 2 do we want to put to the top of the list, and which 2 do we want to sort of put more at the bottom of as time allows? Is everybody sort of following me with that? Do we want to just go ahead? You want to go to your other slide, or do we just want to stick on this slide and see if we can pick which 2 we want to put?
This may be easier just so we can remember the topics. All the last slide was just to pick 4, and then what we'll do is we'll draft study resolutions, and when you're ready, we can bring them back to you, and you can adjust them, and then we'll have the full commission approve those topics, and we'll start.
Right. I think we probably do need to have one more meeting of this group to wordsmith. I mean, maybe not. I mean, maybe we can circulate it and it'll be fine. So we'll tentatively, but I think we'd like to probably see. I know we gave you guys some scope changes to the studies that you guys have prepared, so I'd probably want it be helpful to see everything and see what you guys came back with. Maybe one more time before we send it to the full.
And there's been times when we have, before the November meeting, for example, convene this group, and we can make some changes real quick and then present those at the same time. So we can handle that kind of in whatever way works for you.
Okay, I got you. All right, so do we have any feelings about, I guess we're state capital asset versus inspection programs versus 2-year education institutions. What am I missing? Oh, and felony drug possession. Any,
Felony is one of the 5, right?
I'm sorry?
so so felony drug possession would be one of the 5, but we haven't promoted it
You
yet.
haven't picked that yet.
So
but that
far, I
we-
think we've got a consensus on 5 and 9, right?
That's right. And then, so you have 2 more, one of which could be all the others that we've talked about.
Mr. Chairman.
The one we've already got, which was the one that was referred by the
That was the gun violence.
gun violence.
So that, maybe, that's so that, when we say 4, we're counting that we've already got the gun violence, and that gets us to 5. So there's 4 left.
So now we've got gun violence, K through 12 accreditation, and correctional education programs. We've got 2 to go.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Okay. Senator McPike.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly support number 3. There are sort of long-term structural things that always need to be looked at. I think JLARC at least takes one of those up usually, which is helpful outside of changing hot topic sort of resolution, but structurally that has long-term implications for the Commonwealth, and certainly hope we would put that forward.
Okay. Any objection? I think everybody's nodding their head yes. So one more.
One more.
Delegate Sickles.
Well, I would say that we need to coordinate with some of these other commissions. You mentioned one of them. There's other commissions that some of this, like the Joint Commission on Health Care. We didn't discuss much the health department inspection issue or set of issues, but I think that might be farmed out to a Joint Commission or some other place, because we do have a bad reputation of being a state that's hard to get your license in, and that's probably why it's on this list. So I would say send that somewhere else.
Mr. Chairman, could I interrupt?
Al, go ahead.
We've talked to health. Well, we haven't. We've talked to Joint Commission. I don't think that's one that they want to do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay. Which ones do you not want to do here?
No, we're
we'll
totally
just let
open
the
to you.
staff run it.
I want you to know that that's certainly one. I don't think that they're going to do that one anytime in the near future, based on our conversations with them.
Okay.
So, but what I mean, it's obviously you guys' choice.
So how, if you, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, how
Go ahead.
you think that that it's important enough that JLARC take it up then? Because it is an issue, but they, I keep hear this all the time. They're getting better at this, and companies that want to come and work in Virginia in the healthcare area, particularly behavioral health, they're being able to get their licenses more efficiently than they used to. So maybe this issue is taking care of itself. I used to hear a lot about it. That's all, and I thought maybe that's not. I was edging to not doing it in JLARC for the reasons that it might be self-correcting now, or maybe there's another place to study it. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've been working in the Department of Health space for the last 9 months.
Oh, yeah.
We are fairly convinced that there are significant issues in this area,
Yeah.
and that's why we brought it forward.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of licensing issues in the Department of Behavioral Health as well, a lot, and that you hear about that. Anyway, so my point was, I don't think we should be doing that one.
Okay.
And the capital program, we already got the ones that are left, and I don't have the strongest feelings in the world, whatever the majority wants to do, but the 2-year degree issue is always going to be before us, and I think that we want to get the most out of this. We have a new chancellor now who's got brought a lot of new energy to the system, and maybe it's too soon because he's implementing more programs now, and we ought to give him a little bit more time, or maybe this is the perfect time to do it. I would put my chips on that one for right now, but I'm open to whatever everyone else wants to do.
All right. So for the last one, we got a vote from Chairman Sickles for the Virginia's 2-year educational institutions. Delegate Rasool.
Senator Locke, second, I third.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we have our list then. I see people are starting to arrive for our full commission
Mr.
meeting. Senator
I think
McPike.
we have 4, so we're good.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Senator McPike.
One suggestion, every year we do the economic incentive tax credit review. Just as suggestive, are there other non-economic tax credit incentives to look at? I think it's been about 12, 15 years since we looked at the land preservation tax credit, just on efficacy. There's probably some other ones. And those are not necessarily full studies, I don't think, but sort of a subset, and I'd rely on you on whether or not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been about 10 or 15 years on some of these. So I'm just wondering if we can pick up some of those in either rotation or other check-in sort of process of how are these going. I know we hyper-focus on the economic development incentives. There's still others on the books that I think it's been a little bit since we've gone through those as well.
Mr. Chairman, our direction right now in the Code and Appropriation Act is to focus on economic development incentives and doing that rotational work, but we would certainly be open to the input of this commission if there was a desire to broaden out and look at some of those other incentives over time. We certainly could look at that.
So maybe Senator McPike, that sounds like, again, a pipeline list. So in other words, we have our 5 main studies, right? We have an ongoing kind of look at demographic trends, which doesn't count against that. And then you guys said that we should also consider adding a couple. So in the event that one of these 5 either looks like it's going to take longer or needs to wait for something or goes faster, then you wanted to have sort of a possible pipeline of things. So could we add the non-economic development tax incentives to that list? Does that make sense as a direction?
Yeah, we can, if the direction is to just kind of, we can look into that a little bit and maybe add it to the pipeline. To Hal's point, we're required to do the economic ones. But you're also correct that we did the land preservation tax credit in 2013. So it's been a while.
That was as part of a different study
That was before
versus
we even
doing
had
this
that.
economic development work. But
That was
I think you raised a good point, Senator, about whether, just to broaden out this function of regular review of these tax incentives, whether it be beyond economic development ones. I mean, I think that's a reasonable question to ask, and we'd certainly be open to broadening the group that we look at.
All right. So you guys have some direction for our next meeting. Again, we'll come back with resolutions, and we'll see if they're close enough. We can recommend them directly from the subcommittee to the full JLARC as part of our agenda for November. But if we feel like they need some more fine tuning, we have another meeting in December usually.
We do.
Well. All right. With that, without objection, then I will adjourn this meeting of the subcommittee so we can reconfigure for the full JLARC committee.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Good job.